Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Katie Ensweiler. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at VonLehman CPA Advisory Firm. Thank you to everyone for joining us today for is establishing a nonprofit in honor of my loved one, Right for Me. A huge thank you goes out to Amy at Best Day Ever Foundation for her partnership on this event and all the planning throughout. Before I turn it over to Bryan, I wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to insert them into the chat box. We will try to get to them, but if we cannot, we will be sending out a recorded link of the presentation, the PowerPoint, as well as the contact information for all of the panelists and the presenter here today. So if we can't get to your question, please feel free to reach out to any of them. They said that they would be in contact with you. So this will bring us until about 1:00 p.m. And with that, Bryan, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Today, as you can see, the topic is we'll be talking about is establishing a nonprofit in honor of my loved one, Right for Me. All right, Katie, I'm going to need your help. Let's advance these slides. Which buttons do I check? I did that. This one? Mm-hmm. Some of the kind of the basic stuff. Now Katie's got me straightened out. So basically an overview of what we will talk about today is basically ways that we can honor a loved one. And there are many different ways that we can do it in regard to whether or not we do it personally, ourselves, or with a group, whether we are doing it with working with an existing charity, or if we actually establish our own nonprofit organization. We'll briefly go through these three different categories. And then at the end, we'll turn over to the experts, the ones that have actually made their nonprofits and made it work. Ways to honor a loved one when you're looking at it from yourself or with a family member. There's many different ways you can do it, and it's all really personal in nature. For a memory of a loved one, you can plant a tree, you can maintain a garden, you could start a blog, write a book to help others, advocate an important cause or issue. There are so many different ways to do it, and it's all really more personal in nature. We'll talk about the next one, which is working with an existing charity. When you're looking at it, you're looking at a charity in which your loved one would appreciate you supporting and would want to be part of that type of organization. One way of doing it is you could make an existing donation to that existing charity. You could volunteer at the charity. You could participate in a charity's event, whether it's a run or walk, whether it's the annual fundraising dinner, whatever it might be. Or you could create a scholarship or grant. My dad was a principal at a local high school, and there is a scholarship in his name that goes out every year to kids who are graduating high school. We do that in honor for my dad. But let's say you want to do a little bit more. Rather than just donating or spending some time, you want to actually carry on a specific activity or program on a more continual basis. You'd like to have access to fundraising. You'd like to be able to not always deal with all the administrative responsibilities and burdens that you would have. How can I go ahead and do that? One way is if you have a fiscal sponsorship, which is an agreement with an existing 501c3 organization. That organization will provide fiduciary oversight, financial management, and other administrative services to that basically program or group of people. Basically, it's a way, if you look at it, it's an existing 501c3 organization that takes on your or the person's program or activity, and it becomes part of that charitable organization that's already in existence. Some of the criteria is that, again, grants and donations are given to the sponsor, which has its 501c3 designation, so it is tax deductible contributions, and those funds can be used for your program or your group that does not quite yet have 501c3 status, because you've entered into this fiscal sponsorship arrangement. Sponsors must use the funds for specific charitable purposes that actually further that sponsor's own charitable purpose. So when you're looking at trying to find a fiscal sponsor, make sure that it's somewhat related to the activity or the mission that you already currently have. Sponsors, the sponsoring organization, they're the ones that are going to maintain the records and basically substantiate the use of the funds. They are also going to retain discretion and legal control of the use of the funds. In that fiscal sponsorship arrangement, if you enter into one, should be in writing. We have talked to many charitable organizations that are desiring to be a fiscal sponsor, and we always make sure that that arrangement is in writing. It enables that program or that idea that you have that does not yet can qualify to be a tax-exempt organization to receive tax-deductible contributions. It also provides you access to grants that previously were unattainable. If you're trying to receive grants from a private foundation or from a governmental entity, they're not going to give it to necessarily to an individual. They are going to give it to a 501c3 organization. This fiscal sponsor allows you that avenue. And it's also a great way to determine if your idea or business plan has a market to generate public funding. It's kind of a way to test drive your charitable idea or mission that you have. You can actually remain in fiscal sponsorship for an unlimited amount of time. I've seen organizations maintain their fiscal sponsorship and be part of that sponsor organization for at least 10 years. Others, after 3 or 4 or 5 years, actually change and they decide to set up their own organization. But it can stay out there for an unlimited time without you having to set up a new entity. And the big thing with the fiscal sponsorship is it allows you that back office function. They're going to take care of the fundraising for you. They're going to go ahead and do all the disbursements and do all the record keeping. It's great, especially when you're looking at volunteer organizations who don't have all the time that they need to spend on some of the administrative things. And in summary, basically, it's that fundraising, it's that reduced cost, and it reduces that administrative burden. If you look at yourself and you want to get involved in this fiscal sponsorship, what are some of your disadvantages? Well, you're going to lose some control because now you are part of an existing organization and they're going to oversee you. So if you were thinking that you're going to run your own program the way that you would want to under fiscal sponsorship, that probably is not going to happen. It's going to be something that basically that fiscal sponsor will still oversight and provide you that fiduciary management and look at things. The big part is also risk of funds. If you find a fiscal sponsor that maybe isn't healthy financially and go under, you will not get that money back. That money will end up going to the general creditors, and it's not something that you can get back. And also one of the difficult parts is actually trying to find a fiscal sponsor, finding somebody who's really willing to help you and grow your idea. Let's talk about the next step, which is like, okay, if I'm already have my fiscal sponsor, or if I want to jump right in to setting up my own nonprofit organization. I will tell you, it takes a lot of work. And I emphasize that, a lot of work and determination. First thing I do when I'm talking to individuals who would like to start a charity is I ask them, do you have a business plan? Because really, you're starting a new organization. If you choose to set up your own nonprofit organization, this is a business, and it should be treated as such. And you must fundraise on a regular and continuous basis. We'll talk a little bit about public charity and status and public support. But that's one of the other things that usually people have a hard time basically dealing with is first creating the business plan and then fundraising and asking for money. Because again, remember, this is a business and a lot of people are very, very, very passionate of the mission. And they don't always understand everything that needs to be done to maintain the organization. Also suggest that you get professional advisors, basically an attorney and a CPA who understand nonprofit organizations. Please don't necessarily get your real estate attorney to set up this charitable organization. Charitable organizations have specific rules that they need to follow, and it would be very, very beneficial for you to find accountants and attorneys that understand nonprofit organizations. And again, as a nonprofit organization, you're going to have to actually legally incorporate. And as such, again, from an attorney standpoint, there are certain things that you need to have in your articles of incorporation. You're going to have your governance documents, all your bylaws. You should have a conflict of interest policy. So this will all take time. And the better off you are spending a little bit of money up front with those professional advisors, the better off you will be. And also from a standpoint of starting a relationship with somebody who can help you through the process of starting the exempt organization and then also running it on a going forward basis. You're going to have to apply for tax exempt status, which is actually form 1023, or there's also a form 1023 EZ. If you expect to have gross receipts less than $50,000, you can go ahead and file form 1023 EZ. It's a very, very short form and very easy to fill out. But I will caution you, sometimes when something is simple, it ends up being more complex in the long run. So I've seen many 1023 applications that aren't necessarily completed correctly, and they may not even qualify for exempt status. Actually going through the full process of Form 1023, which can be up to 40 pages long, is something that has more detail, and it gives you all the different aspects of how an exempt organization should operate. So if you are going to go the 1023 EZ route, make sure you have an understanding of all the questions that are being answered on the 1023 itself. It will help you better understand how to operate your organization on a going forward basis. And again, one of the big things I could say is make sure that you fundraise. Because one of the things that you did is that when you look at what a 501c3 organization is, and I know somebody asked a question about this before the seminar began and wanted to know the difference between what a public charity was and a private foundation. Well, fundraising and raising a lot of money will be able, from a lot of different people, will allow you to maintain your public charity status rather than being a private foundation. Private foundations have very narrow focus. They only raise money from a specific few people, and there's a variety of excise taxes that come into play. So as I talk to people, make sure you try to avoid private foundation status. And the way to do that is to raise money and to have a solicitation program or a fundraising program that's out there. And some of the biggest things to take a look at is this nonprofit. Again, it is a business. And sometimes people don't understand it doesn't belong to you. Once you receive that 501c3 status, you're now a charitable organization and you belong to the general public, which is why you have to file your Form 990, which is why it's available for public inspection and people can view it. So they'll know what type of finances you have and what activities you're carrying on by looking at that 990. And the biggest thing I think with the nonprofit is not only the fundraising aspect, but all of the administrative tasks and responsibilities that you have to take on by running your own organization. And I think that's probably the benefit that you're going to see from this expert panel that we have, because these are the people that have done it. They have made it work and they are successful at what they do. Any questions? I think we'll leave it at the end. I'll now turn it over to Stephanie, who's going to kind of moderate our panel. I'm very excited to hear what the panel has to say, because again, these are the people that make it work. These are the people that made it happen, and they know what needs to get done. So from that, I'll turn it over.
Thanks, Brian. As Brian mentioned, I'm Stephanie Allgaier. I'm a partner with VonLehman CPA Advisory Firm. And like Brian said, you know, we work in the nonprofit space. We specialize in servicing nonprofits from an accounting and audit and 990 perspective. But we are not the experts in living in this day-to-day atmosphere and have not had to have the experiences that you have and what is considered an incredibly difficult time. And that's why we brought in some experts. We brought in some experts with some organizations that are all in different different parts in lives within their organization. Some are more established, some are kind of newer, some more successful than others. But we thought, let's bring everybody in, let's hear their experiences. And as some of you are making some decisions on where you go from here, whether you've already established a nonprofit or a foundation in some manner, or you're thinking about it, or you're thinking about what are all those additional resources that are out there. So I'm going to go around. We'll let everybody introduce themselves because I'm sure I can't do that justice. And then we'll jump into asking some questions. And as Katie mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat feature and we'll get to those if we can. If we can't, we will definitely reach out to you in some manner later on, as we don't want to leave anybody hanging if you do have a question. So I'm just going to kind of go around, but Bonnie, if you'd like to start us off and introduce yourself.
Hi guys, I'm Bonnie Collins. My nonprofit is the Live Like Maya Foundation. We established our foundation in 2019, so we're still pretty new. We lost our daughter after a 6.5-year grueling battle with cancer. And basically we just couldn't not do anything. I'm definitely more of a go-getter. I can't sit around and, crawl into bed. I mean, I could, and I would, but the foundation has definitely kept me out of bed, kept me moving, and given me kind of a sense of peace for what has happened to her, because so much good has come out of it, that it just helps me find some sort of meanings, whatever you want to call it, to what happened to her. And the fact that we're able to, help other families, and that goes to my mission. Our mission is we help families financially who have children battling cancer. And we support pediatric cancer research. And then we do a lot in the community. Maya was she did lots of random acts of kindness. That was kind of something that kept her going during some of the hardest days of her journey. So we kind of want to pay it forward through the foundation. So, the one side of it is the pediatric cancer side, but we also do things within the community. We offer a scholarship to Mason students. That's where Maya went to school, to seniors, and do other things throughout the community. So I'm happy to be here today. And again, we are a little on the newer side. There's a lot more bigger and more experienced nonprofits. So I'm hoping to learn a little bit today as well, but I can kind of give some input as to what it's like to be new and growing.
Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you so much for sharing your story as well. Amy?
Oh, thanks. My name is Amy Kappen, and I started the Best Day Ever Foundation back in 2020, just as the world was closing down for COVID. Probably not the best thing to do or time to launch, but we wanted to also establish something in memory of our 6-year-old daughter, Sophia, who passed away in 2017 from leukemia. So our mission, we provide different opportunities for bereaved families to get together and regain joyful moments after the loss of a child. I have also served as a board member of the Cincinnati chapter of the Leukemia Lymphoma Society for the past 6 years. I did and still do a significant amount of fundraising and raising awareness of pediatric cancer and advancements in treatments outside of the Best Day Ever Foundation. And I also serve on a cell manufacturing and technology advisory board out of Georgia Tech, and the end of life committee at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. But part of the Best Day Ever Foundation's mission was to provide resources to our families who have experienced similar losses, which is, part of how today's webinar came to fruition. So I'm very grateful for VonLehman's community partnership, as well as our other panelists, making today a reality for so many of our families. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Amy. Jill?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jill Brink. I'm the executive director at CancerFree KIDS. I think I'm the only panelist that isn't the initial founder of the organization. Our founder, Ellen Flannery, established the organization about 20 years ago on behalf of her daughter, who was diagnosed with cancer in both eyes at 5 months old. Fortunately, she is a thriving adult today, but Throughout their journey, they discovered the gap in funding in pediatric cancer research, and especially in early seed funding. So that is our core mission of that early stage, high risk, high reward, smaller grants to give the ideas a chance and get them off the ground. And I've been fortunate enough to be in my role for coming up on 4 years now as the first executive director following our incredible founder.
Thank you, Jill. And finally, Keith.
I'm Keith Esrick. I am co-founder. My wife's the one that actually does most of the work, but I am with The Cure Starts Now. We're 17 years into this. We also did it as a parent. We lost our daughter back 17 years ago to a very difficult cancer called DIPG. And I think the one thing you'll learn about us is that we tried very hard not to start this charity. And so that's kind of a unique scenario with it. We are entrepreneurs. Both my wife and I have a 30-year experience in building businesses over the years. I've built probably 12 businesses in my career. So I'm very familiar with this realm. It was important to us that we wanted to only do it if there was a need for it, and only if we felt that it could be accomplished. Today, The Cure Starts Now has grown a little bit bigger than what we thought. We have 40 locations around the world. We represent 700 plus families that actually fundraise through us. And we also work with 27 independent foundations, many of which we had these initial calls with about, do I create a foundation? Do I become a chapter? Do I just work through another organization like yourself? So a lot of things Bryan was talking about, we're very familiar with. The good news of it is that we've been able to fund over $30 million in 132 different trials, which has led to huge advancements. But at the end of the day, we're parents. And what we want to do is we want to try to be able to affect these cures, and we're a Cincinnati homegrown charity.
Thank you, Keith. We heard a lot from Bryan, and it's just a snippet. It's a snippet of what is out there, what it takes to, what the options are. And I think today what we really want to talk about is the experiences that these 4 folks have had. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of different methods that they've gone about doing things, and they're definitely in different processes and different infants, to well-established nonprofits. And as Jill mentioned, she's the second that has come in. But there's kind of like 3 primary things as we go through to start off, if we do in fact want to do our own nonprofit. So the very first thing, and it's the basis of every nonprofit, is its mission statement. What is our purpose going to be? And we outline that in our mission statement and make sure that that's going to be clear to the public, acceptable by the IRS, all kinds of things go along with that. So Amy, when you were thinking about, how to continue that legacy, how to continue that name, how to have something for you and your organization and what you wanted to do, how did you go about defining that mission statement that you were going to have, and really deciding on the first steps?
Great question. I actually remember speaking with one of Sophia's oncologists shortly after she had passed away, because like every parent, you want to do something to memorialize, to honor your child. You want to make sure the world doesn't forget them. And I remember him saying, it takes a lot of work to do a nonprofit, really think about this. And so I took that to heart, and I probably jumped into fundraising with some of the cancer research organizations right away, but still in the back of my head, I was thinking about it of, I want to be intentional. So I went through all of the amazing support and services that we had received for Sophia while she was in the hospital. And I certainly didn't want to compete with an existing organization that's already doing great things. We've got CancerFree KIDS, we've got LLS, doing the research, the funding for that. You've got so many great groups that are, bringing in, I'm sorry, Keith, the cure starts now too. There were so many gifts being brought into the hospital, and So then I just kind of started thinking about it. Where is the void, at least in my opinion, and for my family, it was actually after she passed. And when all of our friends and family had to go back to their normal lives, that's when it gets quiet for a bereaved family. So I started talking to some other bereaved parents, asking what they needed. And lo and behold, that's kind of what started our business model, and it evolves with our family's needs. So.
Well, I think it's interesting that you recognize not to have that competition. You know, as we talk a lot about, you know, and Bryan and I talk with some of our colleagues that there's a limited amount of funds out there and a ton of organizations. And, you notice that competition, but you searched for the void that still worked within, what you were looking to do. So I think that's great. And I think another concept and kind of step 2 that we want to talk about, it talks a lot about availability of people and competition. And that is when it comes time to, it's the building the nonprofit starts with you, but the, step 2 is basically once you get that mission statement is building the board. We have to have a board of directors. There are requirements in order to have them. There are requirements that you must meet in terms of what those are. And then each board member has fiduciary responsibility. It is very important that people understand that. And it's a job, it's a task that shouldn't be taken lightly. So Bonnie, when you were, you finished your mission statement, you were moving along, how did you go about determining, the people that you wanted on your board and building out your board and, and really determining the different skill sets that you wanted for your board?
Yeah, so I probably did what I shouldn't have done, and I invited all my friends to be on my board. And I'm lucky and blessed that it worked out. But in hindsight, I may not have gone that route. Luckily, one of my friends is a lawyer, and one of my friends is a accountant, and I have a treasurer, somebody who's great with math and does our finances. And that worked out. But I think for someone starting up, you might want to consider, obviously having a friend or family member on your board is great, but they need to know that they're going to have to do work, that it is a lot of work. And I think maybe, and I know when you're first starting, it's hard to know exactly how much work it's going to be, but I think that we've had a few people, we had, a couple of people drop out, and I think that they weren't expecting how much work it was going to be. It's a lot of fundraising. It's if somebody who has a full-time job, it's constant, we're constantly. So I think just setting standards when if somebody wants to be on your board, sitting down with them, telling them that you expect them to do certain things, have an outline. This is what you need to do is important. I mean, I didn't know. We just kind of jumped into it. We had friends who wanted to be on the board, and it was great. And it's fallen into place, but it's taken some time, and we've had to kind of maneuver and figure things out. But I think setting those expectations with your board members up front and making sure they understand that they are going to have to put forth the effort. And also finding people that you trust. I mean, we're handling money constantly at fundraisers, making sure that you know that the person who is on your board is trustworthy. That's super important too.
Yeah, you mentioned fundraising, and we'll get to that point. But I think the biggest part that is setting those expectations. And a lot of that is through board orientation and understanding what is, not only what are the expectations you're going to set with your board, but what are reasonable expectations really for the type of organization that you may have. A board contribution commitment, their level of finding fundraising, having committees, what type of committees, and what are we going to do with that type of thing. But I think that the board orientation is often in newer type organizations is overlooked because we're still trying to get where we need to be. And, the board orientation and setting those expectations, like you talked about, Bonnie, I think is very important. So, but, one of the aspects you talked about a little bit was fundraising. And, I think, that's kind of step 3. We have our mission statement, we have our board of directors, we are ready to, lack of better words, rock and roll as an organization. And what's the next thing you need? It's money. It's money to do something. And there is all kinds of ways to have money come into an organization, all different types of revenue streams. But Keith, when you and Brooke first started out, and you were getting there and you had your board, you had your mission statement, you developed your organization, how did you go about the initial fundraising? And, the thinking about the little donations to, really truly landing that first big egg that was really going to help you kind of branch out to what you wanted to do?
That's a big ask in terms of how you go ahead and structure it. I mean, I think it comes down to what was touched on earlier on, which is that business plan. You got to identify your market. You got to identify, your ranges of donors. Some are going to be the $20 donor, and they're going to have totally different needs than somebody that's going to come in with a DAF or a direct donor advised fund, where they may come into there with $500,000. And then you have events. How do you run events? How do you build those? What events are the right fit for you? And I think ultimately you have to set your benchmarks. You have to look and see, what are you looking for, and to what level you're willing to compromise your mission sometimes to be able to accomplish that. You may have donors that want to give you a very big check, but they're going to ask that it needs to be given in a certain way that may not necessarily reflect what your organization wants. And ultimately you may turn down those things. We've done that countless times. I think that's different, really, depending upon each individual organization out there. I don't think there's necessarily a clear-cut way of saying, here's how you make money in building an organization. You got to look at what your interests are and everything else, and don't expect it to come easy. Now, I can tell you that in that first 6 months, you may get a very good fundraiser, but the question is, how do you reinvent yourself each and every year? And then you kind of have to have a mind for marketing, because you got to know what types of advertisements, if you will, that you're going to create, and how you're going to bring effectively those super fans. So I don't think we have enough time to really dip into how to make it all successful in that. You find your way. It's just a question of, you got to find your way. And I think that's where the business plan really comes into hand in this process. So I totally didn't answer your question at all.
No,
Stephanie.
well, I wanted you to say all of that so I could say
Okay.
this. Along the way, Keith, when you were making those decisions and you were trying to figure out what was going to work, and the fundraising and the business plan, there were some failures probably, right?
Oh, we made every failure you could possibly imagine. That's what an entrepreneur does. We're experts at failing. We just know how to not do it twice. That's about it. We learned over the years that there were certain fundraisers that it wasn't worth our time. Okay. There were times that we realized that that wasn't the right fit with it, and you just have to kind of tweak it, go back and try to do it again. And now that being said, there's fundraisers that we may have not fit with, and that it fit great with other organizations with it. You find your niche, and I think there's unfortunately, I think we tend to think of this as there is a limited pool of resources, and Cincinnati is a very giving community. And I think that provided that you find that niche and you really, really focus in on it, I think everybody can be fine. It's just a question of how much time you're willing to give to make that happen.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the big part of fundraising is, being mindful that before we fundraise, before we ask anybody for $1, we really truly have to understand that business plan that you talked about. And that business plan is, what are we going to do? We can have a mission statement, but what are the expenses? What are we going to do with the money that we have? And I think that sometimes is the fundraising aspect is so focused on, we need money to operate. We need money to operate, but then, we get money. What do we do with it? And the expectations are that you're going to have that established already. I know as a donor, most likely the expectation is that you're going to know whether it's going to be for operations, or whether it's going to be for grants to other organizations, or just to raise awareness, or to support other functions or other programs. So I think it's an important part.
And I would add one other thing too, that the first 3 years are easy. That's, if you can figure out how to set the organization and to build a nonprofit, and you have the legal advice and you have the accounting advice covered, you can get through the first 3 years. The problem isn't there. The problem is year 4 and on, because this runs in generations. And that's where most organizations truly fail, is at year 4. Because that's when all of a sudden it's no longer necessarily about, even with us, just our daughter and our child. It was well known, and people, our story went all around the world. Plenty of people were supportive of it. But after year 3, you don't have that anymore. And at that point, it really comes down to that business plan, that business acumen, and your marketing to really take it to the next level.
Well, and that's a good point as we come into the topic of, we've got everything squared away, or so we think, that type of thing. And like you said, year 3 or 4 is really when it comes down to, are we sustainable? Do we want to be sustainable? Has it filled the void, or, is this something that really is sustainable? And basically essentially taking it from a mom and pop sometimes type of functionality to a sustainable, growing organization. Jill, I think we can say, with the organization that you guys are certainly there. Some of our other organizations are as well. But as Keith mentioned, and I appreciate Keith setting me up perfectly for my next question. So, but how does that happen? How do you get to that sustainable organization to where it is just flowing? Processes are where they need to be. It's growing, and it's no longer that, it's still a lot of work. We do not want to downplay the fact that it is still a lot of work, but how do you get to that sustainability function?
Yeah, sure. I'm fortunate that I always say Ellen did all the hard work. She really did. I came into an organization that already had, gross revenue about $1.5 million a year. And so it was really taking what she had built and transitioning it to continue to grow and to continue to deepen our impact. So, like you said, a lot of those events had become sustainable as kind of we've absorbed what was a family driven event and something that one of our families would execute for us every year. We inherited that internally and staffed up to do so. And I think the other thing, at this point is continuing to keep it fresh and recreate the wheel, especially through COVID. We had to get very inventive around doing that, but also formalizing and continue to think about how we do a better job on the mission side. So things like we really took the time when I came on board to look at what is our long-term impact that we've had in the investments that we've made. So building out that business case of how much follow-on funding have we had, how many drugs have we touched that have that development, and then being able to communicate that back to our longtime supporters and donors has been very well received, and kind of continuing to retain and engage them, but also bring on the new. And I think that has been a critical point of, we added one big new initiative that was a virtual initiative through COVID, but it's continuing to live on. And I think it's part of because we have that strong messaging point of, here's why we do it, here's the impact that it's have, and join us in a way that meets everybody where they're at. So that coupled with, just tightening up policies in regards to governance and compliance. And one thing I'll advocate for, I know when we were talking about both board and when Keith was talking about, is the importance of business partners. I know we have, they will make or break you in a point of crisis. So we have, and you learn that, unfortunately, you usually learn that in crisis, right? Of whether your business partner is strong or not. But I can't say enough importance on making sure you have good IT, making sure someone to help lead that, having, legal, and we talked about the importance of board, but your accountants, your insurance, all of those things are, finding one person that knows everything is impossible. So making sure that you identify those business partners and really lean into them is critical.
Yeah, it's certainly a whole different world. If you've not lived in the world of nonprofit, it's definitely a whole different world. So, and I think a big part of what you talked about to be sustainable is adaptability, and, what has to be there. So it's, even before we had to fully adapt, and everybody had to adapt to COVID, but, adaptability is big when you talk about, moving into that sustainable culture for an organization. But, sadly, things aren't always sustainable. And there are some times when, we, as Keith mentioned, those 3 to 4 years are fantastic. We get where we need to be, and maybe there's just some reason that it's not sustainable, or maybe we realize well before that this isn't something we really want to do. It's not ideal. All kinds of different reasons. And Keith, I know that you field these questions often from people. They call you all the time, just as much as, Bryan and I field these questions all the time. And I know attorneys do. And so, in terms of, some of the folks that may be online today that are looking at starting, when people make that phone call to you and they're asking you, hey, what did you do? How did you do that? And I know you help them out. And I think that's great. But what are like some of the questions, the top 3 questions that you ask people when they first make that inquiry to you?
Well, and normally the 2 things I always ask of them is, number 1, what do you want to do? I think that certainly it was brought up that it's smart to not just repeat what somebody else is already doing. If that's the case, then, we would certainly advocate work with them. Okay. Because trust me, on the other side of it, a nonprofit is more than willing to work with you, because they're trying to make their lives easier too. And they're more than willing to pay, tribute to your son or daughter, if that's the reason why you got involved with it. And there's ways of being able to accomplish that. Simply having a fundraiser isn't enough of a reason to create a nonprofit, because what you're going to do is you're going to spend the majority of your time involved in things that are going to frustrate you. The day-to-day stuff that are really going to detract from the memories that you have of your child. And so, we certainly want you to find something new to be able to do, rather than just the inspiration of maybe your son or daughter. The second thing is that, I would also ask them to not only do something necessarily that accomplishes something brand new, but I would ask them to kind of go into this with the idea or with the entire intention of trying not to. I think that was the greatest gift that we had, was that my wife and I tried very hard not to create this charity. And I think by doing so, what it forced us to do is we had to sell ourselves first. The other thing I think that folks tend to get into, and I hear a lot of, is when somebody starts to ask a question of, okay, so at what point can this be my day-to-day job? Don't look for that to occur. Okay. This is hopefully it's a hobby for you. Hopefully it's not a chore. But at the end of the day, don't look for necessarily financial stability from it, because I can tell you, going back to Stephanie's question about, I'm getting an echo here. Going back to Stephanie's question of how do you get donors? You are the first donor, and you need to know that going into it. If you're going to start a nonprofit, you have to put the first money in. I remember when Brooke and I started this, we ended up taking a loan out of our 401k for $32,000 to build the first event. We basically set ourselves for broke. That was the point which we knew we were definitely sold at that point, but you've got to be that first person in, and you've got to be the one to make that commitment before anybody is going to believe in you at all.
So Jill, if I call Keith and he scares me, and
I was going to say, I'm just doing nothing but scaring you at this point, aren't I? I mean, that's okay.
I'm
not helping you out in this conference.
No, it's okay. We wanted all aspects. It's why we invited. I'm just kidding. But I'm in a position. I've called Keith because I know that he's he's a good friend, and he's somebody that's gone through it, and he was in my position at some point, and I call him and he scares me, and I say, I don't think I can do that. I don't think that I can get my family to commit that. The other options are to reach out to an organization that is similar in nature, and asking them, hey, I have a loved one. And Bryan talked a little bit about some of the avenues, the scholarships, programs, a fundraiser specific for somebody, other avenues. What are the ways in which you guys have designed some of your programs or aspects to be able to help out those people that really, we'll call them the people Keith is scared. Yeah, we'll call that.
Yeah. I mean, we're very much an event-driven organization, and most of our events contain some kind of kind of that peer-to-peer fundraising where it's, you know, we have a team captain or a family who is, you know, willing to extend fundraising to their networks and do that in all different ways. It could be just direct asks via Facebook. It could be an event and then the dollars come back through the event. But we also have where if their fundraising is extensive, where we will name a grant or offer kind of a pool of fundraising capacity that we can drive all of the funding that is influenced through their family. And then we name a grant on behalf of their loved one who they would like to honor. I think as an organization, we try to be very flexible in that and support it where we can. We have a local family who wanted to put on a golf outing and we're very successful in doing so. And we allowed them to use our kind of donor platform and kind of that fiscal sponsorship that was shared earlier. So I think that has, that is a, you know, kind of a decision at the board level of whether or not we want to take that step. And they will certainly have parameters in doing so, but try to be supportive to hit the end result for everyone involved. And, you know, as Keith said, we're all in it at the end of the day to fuel the mission and to make things better for kids with cancer. And ultimately, as long as it aligns to that, we try to be flexible in those partnerships.
Yeah, the biggest thing is we are all here and everything that every single one of you does is primarily, you know, had an initial reason, but at the end of the day, the sustainability is about supporting the community and knowing that there are other people that are in your shoes and everybody's shoes. But, you know, one of the biggest, you mentioned fiscal sponsorship again, just as Bryan had, and, you know, there's organizations out there that have been built solely, their primary focus is fiscal sponsorship, to be able to fiscally sponsor certain people, certain organizations, and for certain reasons, and some focus on other things. But I think at the end of the day, before we go into final thoughts, because I want to give a lot of time for my final question, but you know, I think a lot of what we talked about has gone back to fundraising. It is, you know, for some people, it's the funnest thing that they do. They love fundraising. These are our development people that live and breathe the ask and figuring out how to make the win. But for the overwhelming majority of the population, fundraising and that ask and that hesitancy is overwhelming. It's a lot. And so I think, you know, building the mission statement and building the board, those are the simplest parts of the three primary things that really can build an organization to get to that sustainability level. But I think that's my ask, you know, an unrelated person that just kind of, you know, accounts for things on the back end for nonprofits. But the fundraising is the difficult part. But, you know, before, you know, we end and we say goodbye and we thank everybody for coming. My final question and I want to ask everybody is, you know, when you started this, and again, some of you are in different instances of your organizations, that type of thing, but, you know, what is the one thing that you truly wish that somebody had told you early on, you know, on not even day one, before you even started day one? You know, I think you're all going to have kind of different instances of what your answers may be, but Jill, I want to start with you, and I want to, you know, kind of go a little bit in order of how, you know, are the years of our nonprofits and the sustainability of our nonprofits and where we are on things. But Jill, you know, you obviously were not the founder, but you came in secondarily and, you know, probably learned a lot in some things, but I think this is good to hear from you as well. So what, you know, kind of that one thing that you wish you had known?
Sorry, so many. I think, you know, in honest, I didn't mention I'm a fundraiser, you know, my whole career has been in fundraising. So that piece of the pie for me was very clear. I knew what I was doing. I knew how to do it, all of that. I think where, the one thing, if I had to say, is the importance again of outsourcing those things that you should not be the expert on. Like payroll and accounting and those type of things. And so we have morphed in those things along the way. And that has really, I think, strengthened our operations to allow us to focus on the fundraising side and spend our time and energy there, and then hire out experts to drive the operations of the business so that we can accomplish more every day from a fundraising and mission.
Keith, what about you?
I don't have one, I have two. I don't know if that helps you.
That'll help.
I would say, number one, Brian touched on this. You're building a public, you're building something that doesn't belong to you. And, coming from an entrepreneur's perspective with it, it was very easy for me to make decisions for whatever we wanted to do with our company, but a charity is not that. You're making decisions for the betterment of the children, in our case, that we serve. And so it's very important to consult with them, get their opinions, get the opinions of the chapters that we represent, which are effectively like mini foundations that we bring together. And I think that that was something we learned after the first year, and we had to kind of change everything. We had to change our board and everything else to be able to deal with that. So you really got to walk into this and realize you're building something for the community good. The second thing, and that's where we're at right now, is this becomes your life. It becomes everything that is who you are. And so there is no private versus charity face that you're going to wear differently. And so particularly from a founder's perspective, after 17 years of now doing this, it's kind of tough to get out. It's a question of, is this like being Pope? Do you just die in this position? And you can't figure out your next path with it. At the end of the day, my wife and I just talk to each other and tell each other, I guess when we cure cancer, then that's when we get to leave. So be ready for it, because if you sign up, it's a life mission. And hopefully you get that same gain, that same sense of satisfaction by making that difference that we've been lucky to do so.
Thank you, Keith. Bonnie?
I think for me, it's the amount of work, and I love it. But it is, I wake up thinking about what's next, what I have to do next, my newsletter, marketing is huge. I think, luckily I'm a graphic designer and I do marketing. So I do it all pretty much, social media, constantly coming up with new ideas for fundraising, reaching out to donors. It is a all encompassing full-time job, and I actually have another job too. So it is a lot. So I think I love it. So I'm okay with that. It keeps me going. Like I said, it gets me out of bed every day. But I think I had no idea going into it that it was going to be that much work. It's a lot.
So a good amount of energy couldn't hurt things.
A lot of
right?
energy. Yeah.
A lot of energy.
Yeah.
And a lot of energy to give.
Keeping the donor interest. There is something called donor fatigue. So after time, other foundations pop up and people kind of move on to other things. And as Keith said, your child, we started this for Maya, but after, we're in year 4 and we're trying to come up. Okay, now we need to start thinking about other kids. It's not just about Maya all the time, which, it is for me, but of course it's for the other children as well. So just coming up with new ideas to keep the excitement and the momentum going, I think is important.
Yeah, I think that goes back to our sustainability conversation with Jill around the adaptability and notification, noticing that that's a thing. So yeah. That's great. Amy, what was the one or two things that you wish you knew?
Well, as we're about to enter into year 4, I wish I knew Keith and Brooke before I started. No, in all seriousness, I think I would echo everything that the others said. It was really the amount of work, and I really do wish I had talked to more existing organizations just to fully understand what I was really getting myself into. But and probably the second thing I would say is don't launch during a pandemic. So.
We'll give you that. Starting anything during a pandemic was not enjoyable. Yeah. So I want to certainly thank all of you for spending some time with us today. I'm hoping that, every member of who was able to be on with us today at least learned that, one big takeaway that can help them or spark some ideas or some other organizations that they can reach out to. As Katie mentioned, we will send out some contact information just in case you do have some questions, and nonprofits are very, very sharing, but these typically nonprofits that we've talked about today are even more open to sharing because they've been in your shoes. They want to help both sides, the pros and the cons, the good and the bad, but just to be able to help each other out. But we do certainly appreciate every single one of you coming on today and sharing your stories and letting us ask you the questions to help everybody out that was interested in learning more about what do I do when I want to honor a loved one. So, giving everybody back in a 5 minutes so that you can sit there and think about, what you've heard about today. But we'll be reaching out soon and following up with some additional content and that type of things. If we weren't able to get to the questions that were posted online, then we're going to follow up with you individually, because I know if you ask those questions, then they are certainly important to you. So we'll make sure that we follow up with everybody. But again, on behalf of VonLehman and everybody that was with us today, I appreciate everybody being here, and I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.